What would you do if your mom asked you to help reverse her osteoporosis naturally? Our guest heretic, Dr. Laura Kelly, explains what she did when her mom approached her with this task. From plotting out a game plan to exposing mushrooms to sunlight, she reveals the exact steps she took to help her mom get her bone density back on track in only 15 months. Now Dr. Kelly is releasing her book, The Healthy Bones Nutrition Plan and Cookbook, which shows you how to create your own bone density game plan while enjoying an abundance of deliciously sinful real foods.
Meet Gina. Gina wanted to lose weight, so she spent 2 years fasting, detoxing, and dabbling with vegan diets while practicing a shit ton of yoga to lose 25 pounds. But it took so long that nobody noticed. Then, Gina started Frenching her food by eating fatty cheeses, butter, sausages, and red meat, and lost 15 more pounds in only 2 months. Everybody noticed this time. Frenching your food unlocks the riddle of weight loss that skinny French chicks use to slim down, look young, and live longer despite doing everything wrong. Be like Gina. Start Frenching your food today by visiting nutritionheretic.com/Frenching.
Fat is bad for you.
I just pop a pill and I'm fine.
Meat is murder.
It's time for bad food punishment. It's time for real nourishment. It's time for the Nutrition Heretic.
The following program is provided as information only and may not be construed as medical or health advice. It is not intended to diagnose, treat, or cure any disease. No action or inaction should be taken solely on the basis of the information provided here. Please consult with a licensed healthcare professional or doctor on any matter relating to your health and well-being.
Hello and welcome to the Nutrition Heretic. This is Adrienne Hugh, the Nutrition Heretic. And today, yet again, I'm starting off with one of my pet peeves. Actually, it's not even so much a pet peeve as much as it is an experience that totally took me by surprise. As many of you, if you've listened to the first few episodes in particular, you know that I've been at this game for over 20 years. And the way that I came to it was through my own health problems. Like I have said before, the difference between a dietitian and a nutritionist is that a dietitian generally decides to be a dietitian sometime in high school when they want to lose some weight, and then they follow the food pyramid and they lose the weight and they're happy. Nutritionist, on the other hand, tends to be someone who has had severe health challenges and usually while thinking that they're doing the right thing by following the food pyramid, and then finds out the truth that something else was more effective at achieving overall health, and that's why they become nutritionists. So that's why I'm a certified nutritionist today. But in any case, when I first started to learn about what I call real nutrition, I was about 25, and I was diagnosed with a huge host of health conditions, from food allergies to heavy metal toxicity, Candida albicans, you name it, I had it. My thyroid was out of whack, but also I had low bone density, which totally blew me away because I was 25 years old. That's not supposed to happen until you're 60 or 70. In my mind. And I found out that it was actually extremely common. And I had no signs, nothing that really tipped me off to having low bone density. But chances are it had a lot to do with this super low fat, super politically correct, avoiding real food in favor of stuff that came out of a lab because that was the stuff that was supposed to be good for me. And as a result, I ended up taking besides fixing my diet, I also was taking a supplement that was calcium focused, but still more of a multivitamin. So it did have a complement of other nutrients, and I upped my intake of unpasteurized dairy. I also drank a lot of mineral water and consumed just more nutrient-dense foods that we are often told we should not be eating because they have too many calories. But as you know, calories are not the only thing food is comprised of. So we try not to even look at calories. As a matter of fact, I encourage you to stop using the word calories and referring to food as energy units, because that's ultimately what we want to get out of our food. We want energy. Calorie is this kind of villain type term. I want you to start thinking of your food more positively in terms of what kind of energy comes through your food to you. So on that note, today I have my guest heretic is Dr. Laura Kelly, who is a doctor of Oriental medicine. She is the author of Healthy Bones, Nutrition Plan and Cookbook. And Dr. Laura, welcome.
Hi, Adrienne. Thanks.
I wanted to, obviously I wanted to have you on the show because this is a really important topic. How common is it for people to find out that they have low bone density in their 20s?
Like you said, it's much more common than you'd think, especially as people have gone away from whole foods diets and as sort of the mechanical age came around, it just becomes more common.
Right. And the first line of your book I thought was so powerful. And if you don't have that in front of you, I'm going to read it to you.
I don't.
Which is, despite the millions consumers spend on calcium pills and the number of prescriptions for bone loss drugs they fill, worldwide there is an osteoporotic fracture every 3 seconds. That's nuts.
It's high. It's really high. It's a big problem, and it's just really getting bigger. We haven't really seen the effects of it at all in Asia yet. It's to come.
Right.
So
right, yeah. As they begin to adopt a more progressive diet, let's say.
That's a nice way to say it. Yeah, exactly.
Because I see my family is actually Chinese Jamaican, and my Jamaican side of the family, when I visited them, they didn't know what their so many of their native foods are, and I mean in a way they do, but at the same time they're consuming things that are just pure sugar water, and the vegetable oils, things that they don't even have the money to spend on. You know what I'm saying? Right. There used to be coconuts just hanging right over their heads. They're not using those. They're going to the supermarket and buying these other oils. But I did get one of my cousins, at least, to start making her own coconut oil again, because she had arthritic type conditions. And what happened was she's like, well, what could be causing it? And I said, well, think of it as lubrication. What would you prefer to have lubricate your joints? And so we, discussed it, and she was like, well, it's easier to do that than to, it's cheaper at least, than to go to the supermarket and buy vegetable oil. And a few weeks later, she called me up and said that her joint pain was completely gone.
Oh, that's great.
And meanwhile, her brother, who has the same condition, he was relying on bee stings. He was, he owns the shop. So he was, he had the stuff sitting there on the shelf, and he's just couldn't be convinced that traditional oils were good for him. So,
that's a frustrating concept that you bring up. It's like, there's all this information. And one of the things I did in sort of researching the book and getting to the root of what is the cause, what are the multiple, of course, causes of all of the situation, is that you look back at ancient diets and ancient food practices, and you see that somehow around the world, everybody knew to ferment their grains. Yeah. Somehow everybody knew to sprout their beans. And this just happened, and this was part of the culture, and this is what you did. And all of that information just simply got lost.
Absolutely. Actually, there's a really interesting book. I believe it's called The History of Food, and you're talking about fermenting. And I believe it was a monkey. I forget what kind of monkey that it was, but they found that when they followed this monkey, they found that it would soak its sweet potatoes before eting it.
Oh, cool.
And great. I'm thinking to myself, yeah, see, even monkeys know this.
Right.
So tell us about the story behind the book with your mom and how you helped her. And that's really how the book came to fruition, correct?
Oh, yeah, for sure. My mother had pretty severe bone loss for about 20 years.
Whoa.
And she's sort of a naturally minded type, although she never really used any type of alternative medicine. She just didn't really want to use pharmaceuticals. And she'd never taken any hormone replacement either. And finally, her doctor said to her, listen, your bones are thinning so rapidly. If you don't take these drugs, I don't think I can treat you anymore. And he was talking about the reclassed shot, which is I think it's a once yearly shot. So she started looking into the drugs and decided that she did not want to take them, but she had no options because there's really no other information available on what do you do. So she called me and she said, listen, I know you're in school, but can you help me with this issue? And I said, yes, I'm sure I can, but I need a couple of months. I need to really delve into it, wrap my head around it, get to the root of, why are there so many fractures in the US? Where are there low fractures? What countries have a history of low fracture and why? So I delved into all of that. I basically took a fracture map of the world and said, what's going on here? And of course, it has to do with diet when you get to the bottom of it. And the thing that I realized is that the diet, nutrients, vitamins, minerals, are the fundamental tools of medicine. If you're talking about building tissue or keeping tissue healthy, the fundamental tools of medicine are nutrients. And so I said, well, I'm going to learn how to use these fundamental tools of medicine. And so I did it through the lens of bone density, came up with maybe nine pieces that fit together to explain, because there's not ever any one cause, right?
Right.
Same way as there's never any one fix. There are multiple ways to do everything. So I came up with a number of issues and I said, look, here are the things that are wrong or that could be improved. And let's start you on this, on these things and see what works for you and how it affects you. And within 15 months, we had stopped the bone loss for the first time in 20 years.
Wow. So
she went back to her doctor and she said, here. And he said, well, that's a fluke. Of course.
Of course, because, this never, the body doesn't want to heal itself. We all know this, right? The body, the body is always trying to sabotage you and break you down.
Right. So at the same time, she had gone to her cardiologist and she had some severe plaque deposition in her carotid artery. And the cardiologist said, well, there seems to be a lot of clearance in this. What have you been doing? And my mother said, well, I've been working on my bones. So one of the side effects of working on bone density was that the calcium was actually now being cleared out of where it wasn't supposed to be and going to where it was needed.
Right.
So it's just a question of really helping the body do exactly what it wants to do. Is basically the way I look at it.
This is what I said at the outset. I have pet peeves up the wazoo when it comes to mainstream science, or as I like to call it, paid for science, because
right.
it often does not. I don't know if it ever looks at worldwide rates honestly. If they do, first of all, that's a big issue is the dishonesty in mainstream medicine, because the few times that they do claim they're looking at what's going on in Okinawa or wherever, they seem to narrow it down to things that they can retrofit into the paradigm they've already set as being truth.
Right.
So what I really like about this is that you listened to. You looked around and you made a map. You just like an old fashioned, just like how they fixed cholera in London, right? They made a map of where everybody was getting sick.
Right. And figured out why.
And figured out why. So, I mean, it just makes sense that we have to, instead of going forward and always looking for an answer out there, I'm making big hand gestures here. Maybe we need to look backwards or, to what's already been proven, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Right.
And that seems to be missing link.
Like we were talking about before, it's just the ideas that have been lost with food. I mean, I mean, there wasn't any training in Western medical school for a very long time up until relatively recently in nutrition. And like I said, you can't really argue at this point that the fundamental tools of medicine for the human body are nutrients. I mean, there just isn't any way around that at this point.
Exactly. And what would you say to those people who say, well, the weight bearing exercise, that's where it's at. That's what you need to do. How big of a role does the exercise and weight bearing play in this? I mean, if we don't have the tools, is what I'm thinking. Doesn't matter how much freaking exercise you do.
Well, I mean, the thing is like there's so many pieces involved, and it's all one cycle and one system. And you can step into that cycle at any point and improve it. But if you're missing certain pieces, the improvement is not going to be as great, right? So specifically with exercise, for example, there's a very strong exercise is greatly enhanced, and the effect of exercise on the bone is greatly enhanced in the presence of estrogen or phytoestrogen. Doesn't have to be endogenous personal estrogen. It can be from a plant. Okay. But the exercise is really well enhanced in the presence of phytoestrogen. So if you have a very high plant-based diet, a lot of sprouted vegetables and things like this, and you exercise, you're going to get a much greater benefit. So even for example, in Japan, the calcium intake averages, and this is another thing I looked at, trying to decide what are the proper recommendations for nutrients, because I can't just say, here's what you need. I need to help you figure out how much, right?
Right.
And you can't go off of the USRDA because that was established in World War II for people who went overseas, for them to not get rickets, right? Right. And not getting rickets is a very different thing than preventing chronic disease. There's a big space in there. Right.
And I mean, we're also looking at young men who are, 18 to 26 on average, who are not representative of a 40-year-old woman.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So you have to, so there's all of these pieces that fit together, and it's exercise, absolutely key, important for all kinds of health issues, for all health, for all long life. Exercise is, there's nothing that compares to that. But it has to be as part of the system and part of the cycle of overall health.
Right, right. You actually brought up something that was one of the questions I wanted to ask, and you talk about sprouting. Now, I've heard of very many things about sprouting. There is, for example, a book on tooth decay and how to remineralize your teeth. The author of that book actually advises against sprouting because he believes that it potentiates a lot of the anti-nutrients in that's where the anti-nutrients are at their strongest in the plant cycle. Is there, when you say that sprouting is good, is there a certain level of balance that you can go over where becomes the problem? Or are you just seeing it as a totally different, different angle from him?
Well, I think a totally different angle. I don't know. I haven't looked at the science on that. All I know from what I've read and from what I've researched is that when the bean or the seed is in its sort of dormant state, there is a structure which is an acid that holds all of the nutrients, all of the minerals bound up, and it's waiting for it. It's waiting, like the calcium and the phosphorus and the magnesium. So it's waiting for the plant to sprout when it will need nutrients. Mm-hmm. So when the plant starts to sprout, the structure breaks down with an enzyme called phytase, and it releases those nutrients. So I don't see how they become less available in that situation, because they're free for the plant to use and they're free for you to absorb.
Right. My understanding is that it's because, and this actually goes into something else that I've had a few experts on the show about replenishing grasslands, for example. And one of the things that seems to be a parallel is that in that stage is when the plant is voraciously hungry. So I guess the idea is that it's sort of like a growing embryo, right? That's when the baby makes its most development, is during that first stage, and it's really just packing on the nutrients and the pounds, wherever it can get the the tools to do that. So I think that's the idea behind that. So that's why I wondered where your understanding of that comes in. Now, this also leads to another question, which is that if someone has had rampant tooth decay, how indicative of that, of their bone density could that be?
They're pretty correlated. I mean, it's the same sort of tissue deposition, and it's the same requirements for mineralization. So I think that they go hand in hand quite often.
Okay, so if I'm not saying, we're obviously not making any promises, but if someone is remineralizing their bones, they should, and they have had active tooth decay, they may actually see a reduction in that as well.
My guess is that they would see a reduction in it. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Awesome. So
back to the sprouting issue just quickly. I know that for each different sort of seed or bean, there are different sprouting times that you need to wait. So you need to wait 2 days for certain beans and 5 days for certain. They need to reach a certain level of maturity before they're actually considered safe. And, if you're doing everything absolutely 100% according to the book, which isn't entirely necessary, right? Everything's a balance.
Right.
But the point being that there are different sprouting times for different beans. Like red kidney beans, you really definitely want to get them to their sprouted state, or you don't want to eat them. So I think that perhaps within those time periods, maybe it's taking into account what you were speaking of before.
That's an excellent point, because sometimes, we just use these terms very loosely, and a sprout is not necessarily a sprout in someone else's definition. So exactly. Okay. That's actually really important. And I'm glad that you brought that up, because I don't want people to necessarily, walk away saying, oh no, that's a crock of shit because it sprouts, because there is too much of this kind of, good food, bad food. And that's my number one rule, is that if you want to be healthful, if you want to help your body, don't ever rule anything out. Stop putting labels on the real food. Put the labels on the crap that has destroyed your health. Don't put labels on good food, because what was your enemy yesterday could be your best friend today.
Right, for sure. Can I say one more thing about that?
Course.
The reason why I brought up the sprouts to begin with when I was talking about phytoestrogen is that in, very, very long time ago in China, food was medicine, right? This was the original way that you treated. And you would, that was your first line of defense. And if you didn't do it with that, then maybe you moved to acupuncture and herbs, right? Maybe, So one of the things that was, soy was a medicine, and especially in the soy sprout form, because when you sprout the soy, it increases the phytoestrogen content significantly. And so that was used to treat women's issues or lactation issues and things like this. So that's why I was mentioning the sprouting earlier to do with phytoestrogen. And I think it's interesting to start looking at, again, how do you use foods to treat various issues in a more refined way,
Right. That's actually, that's I love that, how you say in a more refined way. because a lot of times, again, it's that mentality of good food, bad food. Oh, this is good for me. And then they just go crazy. So and that's not very refined, to just throw things at yourself. And the other thing that I like, again, coming back to what we said earlier about the way that you studied the condition for your mom's sake, was that you said, hold on, we're not going to do anything until I really fully understand this. And especially in the day of the internet, it's really easy for people to just go online, grab the first 3 articles they read on whatever subject and say, this is what I'm going to do. So then they, next they stop at Amazon and they buy like 500 different kinds of supplements and, and, a couple of books that have great reviews from the best friend of the person who wrote the book with different logins. And then they decide that this is how I'm going to proceed. And a week later they give up because
and then they come and see someone like me with their bag of supplements and they go, what am I supposed to do with all of these?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what happens. And you're like, okay, well, we have to start again, because we have to build this base from the bottom up. You can't just throw stuff at it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So, what's the difference? You brought up 2 terms. Other than osteoporosis, you talk about osteopenia. Can you can you elaborate on the differences between those two terms?
Sure. Osteoporosis is basically when you're entering the phase of there's a measurement which says you're far enough below sort of the standard 30-year-old to start to potentially run into fracture problems. And so that's osteoporosis. And osteopenia is a lesser version of that, where you're saying, well, your bone density is less than it should be. And if we don't start addressing this issue now, it will progress most likely into something more severe, which would be osteoporosis.
Okay, so that's the early stage osteoporosis.
It's early stage, yeah.
Okay, so it's the hypoglycemia to your diabetic.
Right.
And it's so then I'm assuming it's much easier to deal with osteopenia, to catch it early.
Sure.
And to address it then, or do you find that people are resistant because they're like, well, I'm not in the doghouse yet, and they're like, Twinkies.
Well, you know what? In general, it's very hard for people to make changes.
Yes.
Especially sort of dietary health changes. So it really doesn't. I've seen across the board sort of people. It just depends on where you are and what's important to you. I have patients come in and they tell me, I am not compliant. I don't do anything. I never take any supplements that people tell me to take. I'm a terrible patient. And they end up being amazing patients.
Right. Well, admitting it is half the battle.
And then there's people who come in and they're like, I want to do everything I can. And then I see them a month later and like, oh yeah, I forgot to take that stuff. And I'm like, okay, well, all I can do is give you the information.
Right.
I can't hold your hand through it. So
right.
It's entirely up to them.
Yeah, that's what people like me are for. I right, put them through boot camp. What are we here for? But I heard a statistic recently that I think it was less than 10%. And it doesn't matter about food, whatever area we're talking about. Only 10% of people ever follow through on the stuff they say that they want and they need, and that is so important to them.
Right.
So that's.
Well, I think, part of the problem is probably like what you spoke of before. It's just like there's so much information everywhere, and everybody has an opinion, and there's so many books, and there's great. You take this, and you're going to live forever, and and that all is great, and it's really exciting, and it's really seductive.
Right.
But when you sit down and you say, it's again, I didn't want to write a book that was full of a lot of stuff like, hey, do this, hey, do that. I wanted to say, here's the real information. I'm not making anything up here. I'm not theorizing anything. I'm not coming up with a theory that says, hey, if you do this, it's going to improve your bones. I'm not doing any of that. I'm saying, here are the basic requirements for tissue building.
Mm-hmm.
Here are where we are in the US based on the government looking at what deficiencies we have as a population. And here are the things that you can do to supplement those deficiencies and fix the problem. And I'm just giving information.
Right. No, absolutely.
I'm reporting, basically.
Well, absolutely. And I really respect that because, first of all, let's just back up a second. You brought up something really good, which is let's say somebody comes to you and you tell them, we're going to lay out this plan, right? Here's my book. Here are the things, the worksheets and everything that's included. This is how we're going to progress. And then they go home and they talk to their neighbor, mm-hmm. who is like maybe 500 pounds overweight and, just smokes and, just horrible health, can barely walk. And that person says, oh, well, what you really need is this. And, right. I had one person tell me recently, and you got to tell me what you think of this because I always thought it was an outlandish theory. The first, when grains were first introduced, everybody died. Most of the people who ate it died. And the only ones who survived are the ones that are alive today. And now we're having a problem again. Do you do you believe that grains killed everybody? I think that our ancestors were a lot smarter than to eat something that was killing everyone.
Yeah, no, I don't think that's what happened. I wasn't there, but I would find that very surprising. Grains are, if you look back at sort of Egyptian literature or hieroglyphs or anything like this, you find grains being revered.
Right.
So I would be surprised if that happened after they killed everyone.
Right, exactly. Like everybody who died from it, the ones who survived are the people who can tolerate it today. And I'm thinking to myself, this is like, where on the earth are you getting this freaking information? And she wasn't the picture of health. I mean, she was
Right.
I don't even think I'm the picture of health, but I look healthier than her.
Right.
So I'm thinking to myself, really? Really? And I'm supposed to take this just hook, line, and sinker.
Mm-hmm.
So we see a lot of this kind of stuff. And like you said, the ancient societies revered it, but they also learned how to prepare it. Key point. Through trial and error. And I always say that if there is a reason to give up grains, it's because of all the wars it caused, because, there were people fighting over who controlled the grain supply.
I would actually say it's probably because of the genetic modification / pesticides. Those
absolutely.
Would be the that I would think
absolutely. I try not to think of that, but it's definitely a real consideration, which unfortunately not enough people are taking seriously enough. Again, people get very blinded by this progress label and the promise of what genetic modification means.
Right. One of the things we see with grains, I'm not the only practitioner that sees this either. It's a sort of a common knowledge thing. A lot of American patients come in and say, well, you know what, I can't eat bread here. I can't eat bread. I can't eat pasta. And they go overseas and they're fine.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was about to say.
Yeah. That really is true. That is what happens.
Yeah. Absolutely. Every time I go overseas, I'm just like, bread. I need more bread because I can do it here and not have to, worry about what I'm going to feel like in the morning, and then I gain 5 pounds. It makes a huge difference, which I think, unfortunately, in Europe, even though they have boycotted, for example, GMO, I don't think there's enough of an understanding by those Europeans who haven't lived in the U.S. And I used Europe just because that's where I go to mostly. But I don't think that they understand quite the repercussions. So they might be reporting on stuff online, for example, and not taking into consideration that the bulk of their audience is in the U.S. and does not have access to this good, better quality grain that they have.
Right.
This was something that I thought it bore speaking about, which is the connection between bone fractures and death. What's going on there? What causes bone fracture, spontaneously die, bone fracture, depression, no will to live, or something in between?
Well, I think it's all part of it. A lot of those statistics have to do with hip fracture and elderly hip fracture, because once you've fractured your hip, you're now fairly well immobile.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you're elderly and perhaps I've seen a lot of elderly patients who are living under the standard American diet, for example, or just don't eat enough. Right. But their nutrient status is very low, and your brain is not going to be functioning properly at that level.
Right.
So I think if you're in a nutrient deficit to begin with, and you're older, and then suddenly you're locked to your bed, you are going to have some form of depression, even if it's just a nutrient deficiency depression.
Right.
So I think that all of these factors sort of coalesce, and then you see a lot of mortality related to. It's not related to the fracture specifically, but they happen. They sort of feed each other into a situation where you don't recover.
Right. And, when you talk about they're already eating the standard American diet, they don't have much of an appetite. What automatically comes to mind is these low sodium diets they put people on, because we do need that chloride to digest our food and to make it taste good. For crying out loud. Right. There's so many elderly that I have cooked for, and I cooked the way their moms cooked for them. And suddenly they have an appetite. They're eating, 3 and 4 plates of food plus dessert because it's the first time they've tasted it in 50 years.
Right. Absolutely. And the other issue is that, I mean, I don't know, sort of getting more specific on it, a lot of the, elderly fractures, especially ones that happen in homes, for example, what they're being fed is basically high fructose corn syrup
Ugh,
and plus genetically modified soy product. Like that's what they get
yes.
fed. And I don't know how anybody can be happy.
I know, right?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, your brain can't function using high fructose corn syrup.
Yeah,
Your brain won't function on that.
absolutely.
So, and forget about building any tissue, right?
Right.
So, I mean, there are sort of all sorts of problems, I think, that come along with the elderly situation.
Right. Yeah. And I know that when my mom was in a nursing home towards the end of her life, well, she was actually in a quote rehab center, because she fell. She didn't break anything, but she fell and she was, going downhill from her own volition. But, it was terrible because I walk in there and they are just putting every synthetic, like you said, high fructose corn syrup, even yogurt, like, come on, don't you just have plain yogurt? Just yogurt with yogurt in it.
Right.
No, nothing else,
Right.
just yogurt. And so the next day I come in and the yogurt has asulfame K,
Mm-hmm.
which is like, wait a minute, wasn't that taken off the market because it's poison?
Right.
I didn't even know they made it back onto the market, but apparently the rehab centers have hold of it.
Wow.
And I'm recently a friend whose mom is in the hospital with breast cancer. Same thing. She's like, "Are you serious? You gave my mom aspartame?"
Right. Yeah,
Uh,
it's a big problem.
Yeah,
I think.
and these are the places that we're going to get well in. And
Right.
when I talk to people again in Europe, Asia, they are having we had a nice piece of steamed fish with fresh spinach, and I'm like,
Right.
what, in the hospital?
Yeah.
Because when I had my baby, they gave me egg beaters and
Right.
margarine and some purple juice. that was my welcome to the world baby breakfast
Right.
that they tried to shove down my throat.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're totally missing the mark. So anyway, sorry to kind of divulge from your book. I wanted to find out more about or diverge, I said, from about mushrooms. And this is something that I totally forgot. Tell us about mushrooms and sunshine.
Well, maitake mushrooms are are a version of sorry.
That's okay.
Maitake mushrooms are a mushroom that actually make vitamin D in exactly the same way that your body does. I don't know if your listeners know that vitamin D is made in your body from sunlight.
Yes.
So the main source of vitamin D for all of humanity up until now has been sun.
Yeah.
So mushrooms function in a very similar way. They transform the energy from the sun into the vitamin D. So maitake do that in the exterior part, the top of the mushroom that is exposed to the sun. All other mushrooms will do that if you flip it over and expose the gills to the sun. So they don't produce a huge amount of vitamin D naturally unless they get turned over or unless there's a reflector. But it's very easy for you to bring home mushrooms and turn them over and put them in the sun for 2 days. And then they're going to turn into little vitamin D factories, and you can dry them and store them. And they produce a large amount of vitamin D. If you have a good serving of mushrooms that have been sunned and produced vitamin D, you're going to basically be covering yourself for the day.
Wow.
So it's pretty great. I mean, there's a difference. Your body uses vitamin D3,
Yes.
which is the version of that is in animals, generally speaking, and vitamin D2 is the version that's more often in non-animal products. Your body has to convert vitamin D2 into vitamin D3, so there's a little bit of loss, and it's the same with sort of a lot of other vitamins. Their plant form you need to convert to animal form, but there has been some speculation. There's been a little bit of people saying, well, maybe vitamin D2 is dangerous. I don't really know about that. I've looked into it a lot and I haven't come to any conclusions. But what I did do is I looked at the vitamin D content of a couple of popular fish oils. And what actually turns out is that everybody says the fish oils are all vitamin D3, and that's what they are, and everybody's fine with that. But that's not actually the case. I spoke with one of the producers of a very popular one, and he said we were really surprised to find out that about half of the vitamin D in our fish oil is D2.
Huh.
So we don't. Perhaps that comes from the plant matter that's being eaten by the codfish.
Yeah.
That's the only thing I can figure out. But so I think that again, it's just a translation issue. If you're only taking vitamin D2 from plants and you're not sitting in the sun,
Right.
then you need to have a little more of it. But I think that that's the only issue.
Yeah, I think there's also, it brings to mind quite a few questions. First of all, synthetic versus the real stuff. Because quite often when they're saying that something is toxic, even, vitamin A is toxic because they're using synthetic vitamin A. And I believe the D2 scare came when they put D2 synthetic form in milk.
Right.
And of course, we're looking at not the nice milk on the farm. We're looking at the factory milk that's been ultra pasteurized and homogenized and is probably fat free because we do need some cholesterol to assimilate and make use of our vitamin D. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's there's a host of other factors that hadn't been considered in the vitamin D2 scare. And I think when a lot of people who do prefer vitamin D2, for example, because they're vegan, because whatever, they're not necessarily getting a lot of the other factors that they need to convert that into D3.
Right. Yeah, no, I think you're probably right about that.
So let me see. We talked about grains and we talked about,
sorry, one thing about the vitamin A, that just because you mention it, it's one of the things that I did find was, as I was starting to look at the research, was that there was a lot of research that came early out of Norway and Denmark and these northern European countries, which incidentally have on par the highest osteoporosis rates in the world, on par with America. And one of the things that they initially were reporting was what you were saying, that vitamin A was toxic and that it was detrimental. Too much vitamin A would cause bone loss. And so that was touted for a long time, and people were like, oh, okay, we need to not take vitamin A and all this stuff. But what actually happens is that if you look at the vitamin A status of these women and the vitamin D status of these women, you find that they have 40 times less vitamin D than they're supposed to have. It's what's called a vitamin D winter, where there's no sun.
Right.
So you have a huge amount of vitamin A and no vitamin D. And yes, that is a detrimental situation.
Right. Well, it's like taking calcium without magnesium, which you point out in your book.
It's exactly the same. It's a ratio issue. It's not a vilifying one particular nutrient over another. It's a ratio issue. And this is another really important thing that came up again and again for me as I started to look at and try and figure out what are the proper recommendations for dosage of these nutrients. The other issue is, what are the ratios of these nutrients? Because if you happen to live somewhere where you have a lot of sun, if you're living in Africa, you're going to have a lot of vitamin D. Well, you're probably going to need to up your vitamin A. Yeah. So it's a question of ratio, I think, with all of this stuff. And that's something that I've never really seen formally addressed by anyone, and I think really is important.
Don't you know that doesn't make money? It doesn't make money. We need to keep people on the hamster wheel, just chasing after one remedy after another. Because they love to sell us this idea that it's just one thing. You're just missing that one thing, right? Nobody thinks they have a couple of things to work on. It's always just one thing, and it's like, and then you look at them and you're just like, where did all of this mess come from? Like all these health problems. This didn't come from just missing one thing.
Right.
So let's say I'm living in Norway and I'm dark, right? So I'm living in Norway. Right. I've got the vitamin D winter. How many mushrooms should I be eating? How many mushrooms do I need to buy in the summer and stick in the sun before?
Exactly. It depends on the mushroom. It depends on where you are latitude-wise in terms of how direct the sun is. I can't give you a specific answer to that. But I can say that generally speaking, it looks like a good handful of mushrooms is going to be somewhere around 400, 500 IU of vitamin D. Okay. And vitamin D, again, is obviously super important. All nutrients are important. one thing that is very key with vitamin D is that it's really about your blood levels, because there are a lot of genetic variation to how humans process vitamin D. So depending on your genetic variation is going to depend how well or how poorly you process. So the same person may need an entirely different dosage of vitamin D to maintain the same blood level, if you see what I mean.
Right.
So the genetics of processing vitamins is really also a whole nother layer of very important stuff. But vitamin D in particular is one where blood level is really the answer. It's not like I need to take 5,000 units of vitamin D a day. What you need to do is you need to find out your blood level with your provider and work towards getting your blood level to the proper level. And again, that's going to be different for each person depending on their genetics.
Right. And would you say that overall, because one thing that we hear constantly, those of us who have looked at all into vitamin D, which is that the standard tests are not that accurate as far as what they report to be sufficient. Would you say that's true, or is that, again, just dependent on the individual?
No, I mean, the blood levels are going to be the same for everyone, is true. I mean, it looks to be that the sort of base level of safety is somewhere around 32 nmol.
Right.
You're looking at something at above that. I mean, this is an ongoing research project for me, and I'm sure for many other people, looking at what really is the sweet spot for each of these nutrients. There are a lot of reports looking at 50 as ideal for bone building. So we're looking at if you start to look also at, one thing I did is I looked at a lot of different cultures across the board, and, people who live in Africa, people who live in Australia, and across sort of history, looking at what are vitamin D sort of blood level status across the world. And they're quite different. They range from somewhere between 50 to like 100, or 150 or something like that. So it depends what are your genetics? What's the history of the history of your genetics, all that sort of thing.
Right.
But I think it's looking like, and I feel relatively safe saying that you want to be above 32, and maybe you want to be somewhere around 40, 50 for ideal bone building. That's where I am right now.
Okay.
And that could change.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I've heard many people say that you should be closer to 80 or 90. So I don't know if that's just, this is, vitamin D is my bag, and I'm just going to tell you should go up to 90 because I can. That's all
right. Well, I am extremely conservative, in that regard. So I'm going to always err on the side of, not the side of less, but I'm never going to say things that I don't know, and I'm never going to push it farther than I think it needs to be, because I think, one of the things, this is a larger subject, but in terms of longevity, right, just sort of general longevity, the only thing we know in science right now is that, for sure, organisms live longer with dietary restriction. That is that is a definite, right?
Right.
So one of the things that indicates is that the digestive system, the processes and the cascades and the pathways that get generated and turned on and off by ingesting nutrients, lengthen or affect your lifespan. And it looks like, because if you're calorie restricting, you're living longer, the less you're going to ask your body to do in that regard, the longer it's going to work.
Right.
So I don't want to tell people, take all these nutrients, take all this stuff, take everything. It's great. Everything is fine. I want to say, what's the base level we need to be 100% healthy?
Right. And that probably a lot of that concept comes from your training in Oriental medicine too, I would say, because everybody likes to talk about, everything in moderation. But when it comes right down to it, they're still eating Doritos every morning for breakfast with their, Dunkin' Donuts coffee with 7 sugars in it. Yes, I think that from the Oriental perspective, there is a tendency to truly look at things in balance and truly see kind of that homeopathic dosing of nutrients to keep. It's almost like it keeps the body and the immune system on alert. Don't you think, when it has to kind of figure it out, as opposed to just being bombarded with massive doses of vitamin D or vitamin A or what have you.
Right. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely that's an interesting concept for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
So, now one thing that did surprise me a little bit was that you had, not so much that you had these recipes, but you specify certain recipes as being vegan. And do you feel that somebody following the strictest of vegan diets can still improve their bone health with your protocol?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it takes a lot more effort because you don't have the sort of ease of raw dairy or, that sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, definitely. I don't think that I provide enough of a vegan diet for you through this book alone.
Right.
But the point being, I mean, I tried to cover all different kinds of recipes. Vegetarian, vegan, meat, carnivore. There's a recipe from my Russian grandmother. It's sort of like there's stuff all over the place. There's a lot of Japanese recipes because what I want to do is I want people to know that whatever you are, however you want to eat, there are approaches for you to take that will improve you. And I can't give you an entire cookbook for every different type of diet.
Absolutely.
But I can give you indications. Yes, I'm providing vegan recipes so you can start to think like, here are some vegan recipes. What else can I do? I'm understanding the concepts. And that's really the key for me of the book is like, these are the concepts and this is how you can employ them if you choose.
Right.
But please, the reason why the book is half science and then half cookbook is because I started talking to people about these concepts and sharing the information that I had found, and people were really excited and they were really happy. And at the end of a 3-hour talk, everybody would go, "Oh my God, that was amazing. What do I do now?"
Right. Absolutely.
And so when I started to write the book, I said, well, you know what? I don't want to just provide people with information and have everybody go, "Wow, that was really cool. I don't know what to do."
Right.
So I wrote the book as the science and then decided I'm going to show you how to start implementing the concepts that you now understand. And not saying, here, you need to go on this diet or here, you need to do this, but saying, again, understand the concepts and apply them to your life as they work for you.
I like that. Yeah. And by the way, folks, these aren't like crappy recipes. These are not like those recipes from the 60s, those health book recipes from the 60s with the yellowed pages and the brown text. And they were all really gross and nobody wanted to go near it. Like you ate like, the bowl of kasha or whatever it was and then decided it wasn't for you. No, these are nice recipes. You got some world-class chefs to contribute. Tell us about that. How did that happen? Did you just go up to them and say, "Hey, I'm writing a cookbook," or "I ate in your restaurant and I really like this. Can you put some maitake mushrooms in there?"
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, Alice Waters is really, to me, I remember when she had her first restaurant. I was living in Oakland, and it was sort of, to me, she was the opening to me. I looked at that restaurant and the way that she was using food and the way that she was apparently understanding from my perspective, nutrition and the relationship of humans to the food, like everything was there. And I was like, oh my God, this is something else. This is something different than what I have been in before. and it appeals to me on such a base level and such an intimate level. And, so when I came to realizing that this needed to be a cookbook, it was kind of one of the first things I thought was how amazing it would be that to have that connection for me of the thing that sort of really made me feel what this was about.
Right.
And all these years later, to have her donate a recipe and to sort of support the concept of the book was just like mind blowing.
Absolutely. Because there is this disconnect, I think, for a lot of people, like thinking about my family in particular. They never have a problem eating at my house. They always think it's great. But when they're sitting at home, they think that it's either one, too complicated, or too gross because it's healthy. Why does it have to be healthy all the time? And it's like, I just made you like the most kick-ass apple pie, and you told me it was too healthy. Just, I mean, you get, and I mean, again, you bring a lot of surprises to this book. You include things like sugar, and you say that it's okay to have grains. I mean, again, I think part of this is your training in Oriental medicine, where not everything is the devil. There's not a good set of food and a bad set of food. There's food and then there's junk. There's not,
right.
So, like with sugar, it's surprising to a lot of people that sugar could actually be therapeutic in its own ways.
It's very funny that sugar is actually, the herbal medicine, materia medica of Chinese herbs contains honey. Yes. And contains sugar. And so they are, again, they're medicines. And it's sort of like, I mean, any other thing that you like, it's sort of like maintain some kind of moderate relationship with it.
Right.
And it won't hurt you. And it actually can be used medicinally, right?
Right.
So,
right.
I mean,
and sorry, I just wanted to speak to what you just said about sugar and honey, because I studied Chinese dietetics they are not necessarily a swap out for one another when it comes to the medical usage, or the medicinal usage, I should say, of those sweeteners. So in the West, we would say, oh, well, I'm trying to stay off sugar. Let me replace it with honey because honey is good. Yes, honey's good. But in Chinese medicine, let's say you have a cough. If it's a dry cough, you might want honey. But if it's like more of a gurgly cough, you might want sugar.
Right.
Because because they have different actions on the body. One is going to, dry up a little more, and the other one's going to moisten you a little more. So, they're seeing it from a very different perspective. And that's again, one of those things that I really appreciate about your book, is that you don't kind of leave those things up to political correctness to say that, we've got to just get rid of all the sugar and let's replace it. Because the more we try to replace stuff, I would rather just see somebody give it up. Don't, because then you open up this Pandora's box for a lot of these food manufacturers to start experimenting on you. So I'm giving up sugar, and then they come out with, the aspartame and the agave syrup and the other things that you have no idea how those are being made, the high fructose corn syrup. I mean, every time we vilify something, there's somebody thinking, I can make money off of this.
Right. Well, I think that the other point of that is that why would you ever want to start to introduce the idea of guilt or bad feeling around something that nourishes you?
Absolutely.
And I mean, as soon as you go down that road, you're just setting yourself up for, you're distancing yourself from the thing that nourishes you. You're not liking, you're sort of having bad feelings about these sorts of things. And that relationship has obviously played itself out quite a lot in Western culture. There's a lot of bulimia. There's a lot of food issues and dietary issues and weight issues, obviously.
Right.
So I think that playing into that paradigm is just not a good idea, full stop. So
absolutely. And that's what my book, Frenching Your Food. Did you ever read that?
That's not the one I read.
But I wrote this book called Frenching Your Food, and it's about how the French adore their food and they love it and they treat it with passion, and they enjoy it for what it is. And if they eat something that sometimes they feel is not the best for them, they eat it and they move on. It's not forbidden, and they don't necessarily, I mean, they are starting to get a lot of the really eating disorders that we have here in the U.S. Now. However, traditionally growing up very close to the French community, my friends would eat all kinds of stuff, and I never understood how they could do it and still be so thin. And now I understand that a lot of it is the psychological, that they're not bringing all this anxiety to the table, that they're not feeling guilty about the cheeseburger that they ate earlier or what have you, and they're not trying to, run it off at the gym on the treadmill. They just do it and they move on. And it's this really, it demonstrates the fact that they have a consciousness about what they eat as well, because we treat it like, having sex in an alley. with somebody you don't know, right?
Right.
It's like I'm gonna just I'm gonna stand over the sink and I'm gonna eat this real fast and nobody's gonna see me, so I didn't do it. And so that's the way we look at it. And in their case, they're just like, okay, I'm just gonna have a quick bite of this. This tastes so good. I'm just gonna bite it and then I'm gonna go on and go back to work or whatever I have to do. But there's no guilt, and they think about their meals. There's a French person planning a meal right now. they're just always thinking about it.
They're talking about lunch while they're eating breakfast, and they're talking about dinner while they're eating lunch.
Yeah, exactly.
It's great.
And every country that I've been to or lived in or whatever, we're always, when I was in Spain, we would be after dinner, we would pick string beans or whatever we were going to eat for the next day's lunch. We were always thinking ahead. And this is, I think, the biggest disconnect that we have in the US, which is that we aren't planning ahead, and we just want to, think about food when we're hungry, and whoever made a good decision by leaving it to the last minute. Right. So one thing that I wonder about when I read your book is whether or not people will, could in any way risk other health issues by focusing too much on their bone health. And if so, I guess what I'm thinking is, could people get into a rut where they're like, okay, these are the 3 recipes because they're not thinking ahead, right? These are the 3 recipes I feel comfortable with. I'm just going to make these 3 recipes like every week. For 40 or 60% of my meals. Do we risk now throwing our thyroid off? I know that you do something that I don't normally recommend, which is soy milk.
Mm-hmm.
You recommend
only properly made soy milk.
Correct.
There's a very key component to that.
Right. But, does somebody who, even if it's properly made, if they're consuming that soy milk all the time, because let's say they're vegan and that's, what they've chosen, do they risk throwing their thyroid out of balance because now they're not getting enough iodine or what have you?
Well, yeah, again, it depends. Are they eating a very heavy iodine diet? Are they on a Japanese diet and they're drinking a cup of soy milk a day? They're going to be totally fine.
Right.
If they're not, then they may tip the balance. That's, with anything, with everything, with all diets, like there's so many foods, there's so many different nutrients, there's so many colors of fruits and vegetables, and all of them have import to the body.
Right.
So you can't just eat one color vegetable, right?
Right.
You just can't do that. That you're not getting all of the phytonutrients that your body requires. So same with anything. You can't just have one, 2 things that you eat all the time. Your body just isn't built to deal with that.
Right. And that speaks a lot to seasonality, something that people are talking about, local movement, eating the stuff that grows around you. So these are ways that we can very handily incorporate different foods into our diet.
Absolutely. It takes care of it. Nature takes care of that for you. It says
Absolutely.
here, during this season, we're going to give you squash, right? Because it's dense and it's got carbs, and you're going to sit around and it's going to help you be warm. It's all of the information is actually right here.
Yes, absolutely.
It's all right here. So it's just a matter of sort of listening to it. And there is a little section in the book about the idea of seasonality and how important it is. So what I was thinking about when I wrote this book, when I first started, was that here, okay, now I'm going to figure out what it takes to build bone.
Right.
And yes, I have done that. And okay, you need this amount of copper, you need this amount of boron, about sort of very trace mineral specific, all these things. Yes, you need all of these things, and this will build bone tissue. But the thing that I realized, sort of coming back around to the idea, is that this is one body, this is one system. And what one body says is good for your bones is not going to have a different set of ratios and nutrients that's good for your heart. It's not going to have a different set of ratios and nutrients that's good for your skin. So because it's one system, when you find the ideal balance where your calcium is going to your bones where it's supposed to go and not into your arteries or your joints, where the nutrients are all working synchronously together, everything is working well to build your bone, by default, everything else will be working well as well, because again, this is just one system.
Right.
With one ideal state.
Right. Absolutely. And
I
this
think
is
it's important to remember that, yes, I have, this book is directed at the idea of bones. And of course, there are a lot of specifics to building bone tissue, but actually, this is just general health. And it's sort of subversive to me in that way, where it's sort of like, actually, by the way, you know.
right. Right. Well, one thing I've always told clients over the years, because everybody wants to come to me for weight loss. And I'm like, you know what I do is not weight loss. Okay. It's not,
Right,
I want you to be healthy. And we like to use weight loss as a marker of health, which I don't necessarily think it is. I know just as many skinny people who have shitty health as I do overweight people who have shitty health.
Right.
And sometimes even more, some like certain
there's-
populations I see, everybody's skinny and they've all, but how did they get that way? And so they've got the bone loss issues. They're losing weight and they're losing bone. That's why you've
Right.
lost weight.
Right.
Your
Right.
bones are light. And even actually, I noticed that a lot with children, because you can pick kids up and you'll see two kids standing side by side. They look pretty much the same, and one you're in danger of like throwing across a field, and the other one is kind of challenging you to pick them up. And I'm like, yeah, this is the bone muscle density on this kid, and the other one has virtually none.
Right.
But what I always tell people is, let's find out if there is something else we need to work on. Because if it came down to just calories in, calories out, you probably would have done it by now.
Right.
But a lot of times, though, that extra weight is part of an indicator of something else that's not right.
Right. A hormonal imbalance.
Or hormonal imbalance.
Right?
Exactly. It could be anything. And the weight is part of the indicator that your body's trying to protect itself.
Right.
Or that,
Right.
Something else is not correct in your diet. And, so instead of just focusing on the calories, I like to focus on the health-giving aspects of food. And then
Right.
when the body feels at ease, when it's calm, when those hormones level out, then, the weight starts to peel off, because the body feels like it's, that fight or flight syndrome goes away, and the body starts to feel at ease, and it's like, okay, I don't need to protect myself so much. I can let that off. take that off my back.
Right. No, that's a great approach to weight loss. It's really good to hear.
Okay, so before I let you go, I have a couple of questions from our audience. First is from Linda Hansen, and she says, "Is it true that that one has an advantage of being overweight? It keeps your bones dense. That's what our GP told my mom when I was younger."
Yeah, I mean, it is true that sort of very, very, very generally speaking, the weight is basically exercising the bones to some degree. So you do find that overweight people may have less bone loss. To me, that's the trade-off is not particularly good, I don't think, in general. But yes, that is the case.
Right.
Your GP is right.
Okay. Yeah. Actually, the other question we have is pretty much the same, which is she was told that people with larger skeletal structures and carrying extra weight on those structures were essentially doing more weight-bearing exercise, just walking around, than smaller people. But the doc did not recommend doing that. Being fat to support your bones.
No. I mean, I think, again, that's not the right trade-off to make.
Right. But, there is a school of thought, and I cannot remember. I think it was the Health Alert or the Maffetone Report, one of those newsletters back in the day, had some analyses from doctors who actually looked at their data of patients over the years. I forget if it was 10 years, 20 years, what have you. And these doctors were reporting that women who were in their 60s and 70s, I believe it was 60s and 70s, who were moderately overweight for the height weight charts, actually lived longer and had overall better health outcomes. Meaning that these weren't super scrawny women. They were women who, maybe just had a little curve, not fat by any stretch of the imagination, but had a little comfortable weight that some people may scoff at.
Right. No, I mean I think that's a different situation than seeing a lot of effective bone density from weight. That what you're talking about probably has, I mean, I certainly agree with, and I think it probably has to do with hormone production. You're going to have better and increased hormone production with a little bit of extra tissue there. So you're going to have the effects, the beneficial effects of hormone of more balanced and more hormone production even as you get older with a little bit of weight.
Right.
So that is going to have a wide-ranging systemic effect on improving everything.
Fantastic.
So,
Fantastic.
yeah.
Are there any tips, like, because this is such a fabulous book. It's about 300 pages of recipes and documentation. And like I said, they're not crappy recipes, folks. No, seriously, they're not, because I have been around the block and a lot of so-called health books. I don't care if it's paleo primal, vegan macrobiotic. They're shitty. And these are not shitty recipes. You might just want to change the name of the book.
Thanks.
I mean,
really,
it's
important to me. Like you said, there's just so many books out there, and it's like there's a lot of stuff that you can do, and let's get really serious about it. And really, what I want is, again, it's like we have the stigma of the past, of the low fat fad. You can't eat fat, you can't eat dairy, you can't eat eggs because your cholesterol is high. All of that stuff. Well, you know what? That time is over now, and like we know now that that's over. And Time Magazine had it on its cover, so it's definitely over. So it's actually what we want to do is we want to have full fat dairy. We want to have some cholesterol in our diet. We want all of those things. We just don't want them too much, right? We don't want just to drink full fat milk every day all the time.
right.
But we want to have these things in our diet to have a really, really rounded, full nutritional experience. And guess what? It tastes better.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And so here we go. So let's embrace all of those things.
I have a friend who's a psychotherapist, and he says, when you join a cult, you'll know it's a cult because they try to control your food. And
Right.
and it's true, because once you can control someone's food, once they tell you you can't have, the fat and the dairy and all the things that your ancestors ate, people in your culture ate, you're
Right.
dissociating yourself. Look how many people have ruined their relationships over their diet.
Right.
Look how many people have, joined something and they sit at Thanksgiving dinner with their tofurkey and a grimace on their face because they can't have the
Right.
real thing. It's, and then, they complain that they have to deal with the aunts and the uncles telling them that they should just have a little bit or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So, it is a way that people have found to segregate themselves from society. And that's kind of tragic. So, again, I really do appreciate that you've written this book in such a user-friendly way, with the different cheat sheets and worksheets and things that you can understand how much you're getting. That was really a fantastic element in the book, is that you show people how to monitor through the recipes how much calcium they're getting, how much vitamin D they're getting, how much of all the different key nutrients and cofactors that they're getting to support bone health. And like you said, if people keep it rotating and they don't focus on, well, I got twice as much today as I really needed, then we're going to be in balance. Do you have any just parting words as far as what you would recommend for people to do if they wanted just that, I guess, quick start, or not necessarily quick start, but they wanted to really just wrap their brain around where to start within the program? Is it just starting with reading the front and then choosing one recipe and adding one recipe a week, or is it something else?
I would probably
or should say one
recommend
habit.
them read sort of probably the supplement section. I would read about your bones, sort of you can get the basic idea of why we're even talking about this,
Yes.
and then the supplement section. And because regardless of whether your nutrition comes from foods, whole foods, or supplements, I mean, obviously whole foods are going to contain enzymes. They're going to be much easier for your body to absorb. They're going to be much more useful. But there are certain elements, one specifically that I can talk about in the American diet presently, that we just don't get. And if you look at the Japanese culture, for example, again, where they have thin bones according to our standards, but they have very low rates of fracture comparatively.
Right.
So there's a big difference between, again, the idea of osteoporosis, which is a measurement of density, and fracture, and they aren't the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a whole nother sort of issue to discuss, but maybe another time. But there is a key element in the Japanese diet, in the Asian diet overall, or there used to be, which is a subtype of a vitamin K. And this is just not present in the American diet. And one of the ways in which calcium functions in the body is through a protein called osteocalcin. And osteocalcin needs to be activated. And it's activated with the presence of this vitamin K subtype, vitamin K2 subtype.
Right.
Without that, you will not have the activation of osteocalcin. You will not get proper and complete calcium deposition in the bone. So this, as soon as you add this back into the diet, this is where it's imperative to start. If you did one thing, it would be to find the sources of vitamin K2 that work for you. That would be that's number one starting point.
Awesome. That's a great piece of advice. I totally forgot to even bring K2 into the conversation because there's just so much to talk about in this book, and it is really fabulous. Thank you so much for writing it. I am definitely recommending it to everybody that I know. Our guest heretic today is Laura Kelly, doctor of Oriental Medicine, author of the Healthy Bones Nutrition Plan and Cookbook. Do you have a website yet for the book?
Momentarily. It will be medicinethroughfood.com.
Okay, and through spelled all the way out?
Spelled out. And it looks like there's going to be a series. So I'm going to start to address very common diseases and sort of work with people how to address them through food.
Fantastic. Thank you so much once again. And I look forward to having you on the show when one of your next books comes out.
Thank you, Adrienne. It was fun.
Thanks. Same here. Bye-bye.
The Nutrition Heretic podcast is a production of Savor the Journey, LLC. Our audio editor is Nikola Popovich. Our podcast manager is Crystal McLean, and our operations manager is Linda Hansen. I'm your host, Adrienne Hugh, the Nutrition Heretic. You can find us at nutritionheretic.com, where you can download the Nutrition Heretic's free shit list of 7 health foods to avoid like the plague. You can also listen to previous episodes at nutritionheretic.com/podcast. Be sure to like us on social media for updates. Our Facebook page is facebook.com/nutritionheretic and on Twitter at NutriHeretic. Contact us with show ideas, questions, or if you just want to be a guest. And don't forget to rate our podcast on iTunes and Stitcher. Thanks.